For most people, Australia's story begins in 1788, when British ships arrived on its shores. But that chapter is only the latest page in a history stretching back tens of thousands of years. Long before the pyramids of Egypt were built, before Stonehenge stood on the English plains, before agriculture transformed human civilization, people were already living across the Australian continent. Today, Aboriginal Australians and Torres Strait Islander peoples preserve the world's oldest known continuous living cultures, with archaeological evidence showing an unbroken presence extending back at least 65,000 years. For decades, scientists believed they understood how this remarkable history unfolded. Early modern humans left Africa, traveled along the southern coast of Asia, reached Australia, and then remained almost completely isolated for tens of thousands of years. It seemed like a straightforward story, but advances in ancient DNA and modern genome sequencing have revealed a far more complex picture, one involving extraordinary ocean voyages, encounters with other human species, and possible contacts that researchers are still trying to understand. The genetic story of Australia is now recognized as one of the most remarkable chapters in the history of our species. Before exploring the discoveries, it's important to understand who we're talking about. Aboriginal Australians are not a single people. Before European colonization, there were more than 250 distinct language groups across the continent, each with its own territory, traditions, governance, and deep cultural identity. Torres Strait Islander peoples, whose homelands lie between northern Australia and Papua New Guinea, have their own rich histories and cultures as well. Together, these peoples represent an extraordinary continuity. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Majed Bebe in Australia's Northern Territory indicates that humans were living on the continent around 65,000 years ago. That means people were already adapting to Australia's unique environments while Neanderthals still inhabited parts of Europe. Agriculture was still tens of thousands of years away. Cities had not yet been imagined, yet generations of families were already passing knowledge from one generation to the next across Australia's landscapes. Maintaining continuous cultures over such immense stretches of time required remarkable resilience and adaptation. Communities learned to thrive in deserts, tropical forests, coastal regions, mountain ranges, and vast grasslands. Their knowledge systems evolved alongside changing climates, preserving traditions across thousands of generations. Studying this ancient history is not easy. Australia's climate poses a major challenge for scientists. Heat, humidity, and changing environmental conditions rapidly break down DNA, making ancient genetic material extremely difficult to recover. Unlike colder regions of Europe or Siberia, where DNA can survive for tens of thousands of years, Australian samples rarely preserve well enough for complete analysis. To overcome this challenge, researchers combine several approaches. They analyze the genomes of present-day Aboriginal Australians, compare them with ancient remains where DNA has survived, and examine genetic relationships with neighboring populations throughout Southeast Asia and Papua New Guinea. One milestone came in 2011, when researchers successfully sequenced the genome from a century-old lock of hair collected from an Aboriginal man in Western Australia. Together with later genomic studies, these discoveries began transforming our understanding of Australia's earliest inhabitants. The first major discovery concerns timing. For many years, scientists believed humans reached Australia roughly 45,000 to 50,000 years ago. But excavations at Majed Bebe dramatically changed that picture. Carefully dated stone tools, grinding stones, pigments, and other evidence showed that people were living there approximately 65,000 years ago. Genetic evidence is broadly consistent with this early arrival. Modern Aboriginal Australian populations share ancestry that diverged from other non-African populations tens of thousands of years ago, fitting a timeline that places their ancestors among the earliest groups to expand across southern Asia. This finding has profound implications. Australia has never been connected to mainland Asia by land. Even during periods of lower sea levels, early humans still had to cross stretches of open ocean. That means some of the first people to reach Australia were capable of organized seafaring long before written history, metal tools, or advanced navigation. Imagine what that required. small groups carrying families, tools, food, and hope, crossing unfamiliar waters toward lands they could not fully see. Genetic evidence suggests the founding population may have been relatively small, yet their descendants spread across an entire continent and maintained continuous cultures for tens of thousands of years. Another fascinating question concerns Australia's long isolation. For much of its history, Aboriginal Australian populations appear to have remained largely separated from the rest of the world. But not completely. In 2013, one influential genetic study proposed evidence of gene flow from populations related to South Asia into parts of Australia around 4,000 years ago. The timing appeared to coincide with archaeological changes, including new stone tool technologies and the arrival of the dingo, whose ancestors likely came from Asia. This hypothesis attracted enormous attention because it suggested ancient contact across the Indian Ocean. However, the picture remains debated. Some later studies have supported aspects of the finding, while others argue that the genetic evidence can also be explained through much older shared ancestry or different migration patterns. Today, researchers generally agree that the possibility of later contact deserves continued investigation, but the exact scale, timing, and origin remain active areas of scientific research. Perhaps the most astonishing discovery lies even deeper in the past. It involves a mysterious group of ancient humans known as the Denisovans. Until recently, almost nothing was known about them. Their existence was first recognized from a handful of fossils discovered inside Denisova Cave in Siberia. A fingerbone, several teeth, and fragments of skull. Yet despite the scarcity of fossils, scientists recovered enough DNA to reconstruct their genome. When researchers compared Denisovan DNA with modern populations around the world, they found evidence of ancient interbreeding between Denisovans and the ancestors of living humans outside Africa. But the amount of Denisovan ancestry was not evenly distributed. People from Papua New Guinea and many Aboriginal Australian groups carry among the highest levels of Denisovan ancestry known anywhere in the world. These inherited genetic fragments represent encounters between two different human populations tens of thousands of years ago, somewhere in Asia, before the ancestors of Australians and Papuans reached Sahul. Some Denisovan-derived genes appear to have contributed to immune function and adaptation to local environments, demonstrating that these ancient encounters may have provided biological advantages that persist today. In other words, Denisovans disappeared as a separate human population, but parts of their genetic legacy continue to live on in millions of people. To fully understand this story, we also need to understand Sahul. During the last ice age, sea levels were much lower than today. Australia, Papua New Guinea, and Tasmania formed one enormous landmass known as Sahul. The first settlers spread across this connected continent before rising seas gradually separated the regions. Modern genetic research shows that Aboriginal Australians and Papuan populations share deep common ancestry from these original settlers, while also following distinct evolutionary paths after thousands of years of geographic separation. Torres Strait Islander peoples reflect the unique history of communities living between these regions, shaped by both ancient connections and more recent interactions across the Torres Strait. The sea eventually divided the land, but it did not erase the shared history written into their genomes. Taken together, these discoveries reshape our understanding of humanity itself. They reveal that some of the earliest modern humans undertook deliberate sea voyages across open water. They show that our ancestors encountered and interbred with other human groups like the Denisovans. They demonstrate that human history has always been more connected, more dynamic, and more surprising than simple migration maps suggest. Most importantly, they remind us that Australia's deepest history is not preserved only in archaeological sites or ancient DNA laboratories. It is carried by living cultures whose traditions stretch back over 65 millennia. Science continues to refine the details, and debates remain about certain chapters of this remarkable journey. But one conclusion is clear: the history of Australia is not simply the history of a modern nation. It is one of humanity's oldest surviving stories. If this video changed how you think about Australia's past, let us know in the comments. Which discovery surprised you the most? And if you're an Aboriginal Australian or Torres Strait Islander, We'd especially appreciate hearing your perspective. If you enjoy exploring the genetic history of humanity and the discoveries that continue to reshape our understanding of the ancient world, subscribe for more documentaries. The story of human origins is far from finished, and the next chapter may be even more surprising.